Have you ever stood at a crossroads, feeling that irresistible pull towards something you knew was just beyond the boundary?
Mm-hmm.
A choice that maybe promised something grand, but, well, it whispered of hidden costs.
Oh, definitely. That's a very familiar feeling, I think.
It's that universal moment, isn't it? Where a seemingly small decision can fundamentally alter your path.
It really can.
And what about the ripple effects? Those consequences that often spread far wider, deeper, more unexpectedly than we could ever imagine in that first moment of temptation.
That experience you describe is so profoundly human. It's a recurring drama, really, that plays out in our lives individually and, collectively too.
Yeah.
Today we're diving into Genesis chapter 3. And this is a narrative so pivotal it doesn't just describe a turning point in history. It almost defines the human condition as we've known it.
Right.
This isn't just some ancient story we're dissecting. It's the profound moment where the perfect, harmonious creation we marveled at back in Genesis 1 and 2 takes this really dramatic, irreversible turn.
It's truly where innocence met consequence head on, isn't it? Shaping everything that followed.
Absolutely. Head on is a good way to put it.
Okay, let's truly unpack this. Our mission today, as always, is to dig into the sources, the text itself, and extract the essential insights. As we journey through this foundational chapter, we're going to wrestle with some, critical questions. Questions that reverberate through all of human existence. Like, what was the true, nuanced nature of this forbidden knowledge of good and evil? What made it so enticing?
That's a huge one. It's not as simple as it sounds.
Exactly. And beyond just simple blame, what specific roles did the cunning serpent, the woman, and the man each play in this pivotal world-altering event?
Getting into those individual responsibilities is key, I think.
And maybe most importantly, how did this single devastating transgression forever reshape humanity's intricate relationships?
Yeah.
With God, with the natural world around us, and crucially with each other.
All those connections were fundamentally altered.
This deep dive aims to show you that this isn't merely an old religious text. It's a foundational narrative.
Yeah.
It offers profound insights into our very existence, the brokenness we often grapple with, and, maybe surprisingly, even the enduring glimmer of hope that manages to emerge, even in the thick of despair.
It's a narrative that speaks directly to the core of what it means to be human, doesn't it? To make choices and, to live with their weight.
Yeah.
It's really the launch pad for understanding so much of what comes after in history and thought, in everything.
So let's picture the scene again. We're in the Garden of Eden, a place of, just breathtaking beauty, right?
Yeah.
Abundant provision and an almost unimaginable intimate fellowship with God.
Paradise, essentially.
Exactly. Adam and Eve reside in this idyllic place with one single solitary prohibition. Do not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Just one rule.
Every other tree, every other fruit is theirs for the taking. It's really a testament to divine generosity. But then a new character slithers into the narrative. And here's where the tension really starts to build.
Indeed. The text doesn't waste any words. It immediately introduces the serpent in Genesis 3.1 with this really striking description. It was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made.
Subtle. That word stands out.
It really does. This isn't just about being sneaky. It immediately signals a cunning, a deceptive intelligence. We're not talking about brute strength here, but psychological sharpness. An adversary that operates through insidious temptation, manipulation, rather than just overt force. It's a master of persuasion, really.
And its very first move is, it's a textbook example of planting doubt, isn't it? A real masterclass in psychological warfare.
Absolutely.
It doesn't outright command the woman to disobey God. Instead, it asks a question, one designed to subtly twist God's clear instruction. It asks, "Yea, hath God said, ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden?"
See that slight twist? Every tree.
Exactly. It's not a genuine question. It's a rhetorical maneuver. It's crafted to make her question God's generosity, implying that maybe, just maybe, God is holding out on them, restricting their potential.
It's so clever because it starts with just the tiny seed of suspicion. Did God really say that? Is he really that generous?
That's precisely right. It begins by creating that initial seed of doubt, subtly challenging the established benevolent boundary God had set. The woman, who we later know as Eve, then responds. She actually states God's permission quite accurately at first. We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden. That's Genesis 3.2.
So far, so good. She knows the general permission.
But then she adds this crucial detail. something that wasn't explicitly commanded by God, at least not in the Genesis 2 account. She says, "Neither shall you touch it, lest ye die." That's from Genesis 3:3.
Ah, the touch it part. That's the addition.
That's a fascinating embellishment, isn't it? She's not just reciting God's rule, she's adding to it. It makes you wonder, what does that reveal about her state of mind right then? Was it a genuine misunderstanding or something else?
It could reveal a really complex internal landscape. On one hand, yeah, it might be a genuine misunderstanding. Maybe the command got slightly garbled, perhaps passed from Aram, since God gave it to him before she was created.
That's possible.
Or, on the other hand, it could be an attempt, maybe subconscious, to strengthen the prohibition in her own mind. To kind of build a bigger mental fence around the Forbidden Act, making it seem even more absolute, even more dangerous. Don't even get close.
Right, like adding extra padding to the rule.
Exactly. Either way, this small deviation from the precise divine instruction, it exposes a potential vulnerability, doesn't it? A tiny crack.
Yeah.
And the serpent, with its subtle nature, it quickly perceives this and exploits it. It tests the strength of her understanding and her commitment.
And exploit it. It absolutely does. Having found that little crack, the serpent immediately goes for the direct contradiction. A full frontal assault on God's word itself.
No more subtlety now.
No. It declares in Genesis 3:4, flat out, "Ye shall not surely die." No ambiguity there, no room for misinterpretation. It's basically calling God a liar.
A direct challenge to God's truthfulness.
And then it follows up with an even more insidious move. An implied accusation against God's very motives. Painting him as a jealous, maybe. Self-serving. "For God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil." Verse 5.
Wow. That's a bold claim.
It really is. It suggests God is actively withholding beneficial knowledge, divine power even, portraying him as restrictive, not the generous creator he had proven himself to be.
It's a profound attack on their trust, isn't it? It turns God into a rival, someone holding them back, rather than their benevolent authority.
Yeah.
This rhetorical masterstroke, it effectively reframes God's prohibition. It's not protection anymore, it's suppression. It promises this grand, almost divine enlightenment if only they defy their creator.
It makes disobedience seem like liberation.
Precisely, and that sets the perfect tragic stage for the act of disobedience itself.
Which brings us to Genesis 3:6, the absolute pivot point. The moment everything in the garden, and you could argue in human history, irrevocably shifts.
This is it, the crux.
We see Eve's internal deliberation. And it's important to note, this isn't some snap decision born of pure impulse. The text describes a multi-layered appeal of the fruit, a complex internal rationalization.
She thinks it through.
She does. She sees, first, that the tree was good for food. That's a very primal physical desire, right?
Yeah.
Appealing to basic sustenance or pleasure.
The physical appeal.
Second, that it was pleasant to the eyes, an aesthetic appeal. It looked good, something beautiful and desirable to behold, drawing her in visually.
The visual allure.
And third, and maybe the most potent hook, it was a tree to be desired to make one wise. This is the intellectual, the existential allure, the promise of gaining superior knowledge, understanding, the very thing the serpent offered, to be as gods.
That combination is powerful. Physical desire, aesthetic pleasure, and the promise of wisdom or power.
This internal weighing of perceived benefits against God's explicit command is absolutely critical, isn't it?
It is. It reveals a conscious, deliberate choice. It's not merely an accidental misstep or, an unavoidable deception. Eve processes the serpent's suggestions, she assesses the fruit herself, and she makes an informed decision based on these perceived advantages.
Right.
Empowered by these perceptions, the text tells us plainly, she took of the fruit thereof and did eat. It's a direct, intentional act of transgression. She crossed the line.
And crucially, the story then immediately, explicitly involves Adam. It states that Eve gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. That little phrase, with her, it's incredibly significant, isn't it?
It really is. It strongly implies Adam's physical presence right there. He wasn't off somewhere else. He seems to have witnessed the entire dramatic interaction with the serpent. He observed Eve's deliberation and her subsequent act.
So he wasn't just handed the fruit later with no context.
The text suggests not. And then he participates immediately, and it seems without question. He eats. He wasn't deceived in the same direct way Eve was, according to the narrative flow. He seems to make a conscious, active choice.
Precisely. His silence during the serpent's deception is often highlighted by theologians and scholars. It's a key element of his responsibility. He was with her, a silent observer, yet he didn't intervene. He didn't object. He didn't reassert God's command, which he had received directly.
That silence is powerful in a negative way.
His choice, therefore, it feels like an independent act. Maybe influenced by his wife's example, sure, or perhaps the desire to share her fate, whatever it might be. But ultimately, it was his own decision.
Yes. This immediate, deliberate participation carries immense weight. It marks him as equally accountable in the transgression.
So what happens the moment they eat? The serpent's promise that their eyes shall be opened, it does in fact come true.
It does, but with a twist.
A huge twist.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the glorious divine enlightenment they might have hoped for. Instead of profound wisdom, Genesis 3:7 states, the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked.
Suddenly, nakedness is a problem.
Exactly. This wasn't a knowledge of gods or some abstract moral understanding. It was a stark, uncomfortable, deeply personal awareness of their own vulnerable, exposed state. It's the abrupt, harsh dawn of shame.
This is a radical shift from their previous state, isn't it? Back in Genesis 2:25, it explicitly says they were naked and were not ashamed. Complete innocence.
Right.
Now, with their eyes opened in this new way, the immediate response to this new self-awareness is overwhelming shame, guilt.
And what did they do?
It prompts them to sew fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. Or loincloths, maybe. Verse 7.
Fig leaves. Seems pretty flimsy.
It's a rudimentary, self-made attempt at covering, a desperate effort to hide their newfound vulnerability, their disgrace. It's such a stark contrast to their previous state of innocent nakedness. It symbolizes a profound loss of inner peace and external harmony.
And that beautiful, intimate fellowship they once shared with God.
Mhm.
It's instantly, tragically broken.
Shattered.
When they heard the voice of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, their immediate instinctual response was to hide from the presence of the Lord God amongst the trees of the garden. That's verse 8.
That physical act of hiding. It isn't just about not being seen physically, is it?
No, it vividly symbolizes a profound spiritual separation that had just occurred. The joy of intimate communion is replaced by this paralyzing fear of judgment.
This act of hiding is such a crucial signpost. It indicates the radical shift in their relationship with their Creator. And God's subsequent call, "Where art thou?" in verse 9, it's not really a query about Adam's physical location, is it? An omniscient God already knows that.
Right, it's deeper than that.
Much deeper. It's a poignant question about Adam's changed spiritual state, his relationship with God, the new broken reality of their existence. It's almost an invitation, isn't it? An invitation to confront what has happened. Come out, face this.
And Adam's response is incredibly telling. It's almost a roadmap for the human condition after this event. He confesses, "I heard thy voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself." Verse 10.
Notice the direct link. Fear, because of nakedness, leading to hiding.
His fear is directly and explicitly linked to his newfound knowledge of nakedness and shame. It's a deep-seated, visceral change within him, a fundamental reorientation from trust to apprehension.
Yes, his fear is a symptom of the broken fellowship. God then directly addresses the cause, skillfully pinpointing the source of this new fear and self-awareness. He asks, "Who told thee that thou wast naked? Hast thou eaten of the tree whereof I commanded thee that thou shouldst not eat?" That's verse 11.
God zeroes right in on it.
He does. God's question leaves no room for evasion. It directly challenges their disobedience.
And here it comes. The infamous blame game. A pattern we've seen repeated countless times throughout history, haven't we?
Oh, yes. It starts immediately.
Adam immediately deflects responsibility. He blames Eve, and by a very thinly veiled extension, he blames God himself.
How so?
He declares, "The woman whom thou gavest to be with me, she gave me of the tree, and I did eat." That's verse 12.
The woman you gave me. Subtle, but not really.
Exactly. It's a classic, almost archetypal move. He's not only blaming his wife, but also subtly implying that God is somehow at fault for giving him this quote-unquote problem woman in the first place.
It perfectly encapsulates the post-fall human tendency to externalize fault, doesn't it? It's never just my fault.
It's a profound moment of abdicating personal responsibility. A stark illustration of the brokenness entering human relationships right there.
And the chain continues.
It does. When God tours to Eve and asks her, very simply, "What is this that thou hast done?" In verse 13, she, in turn, passes the buck. She blames the serpent.
"The serpent beguiled me, and I did eat." Verse 13 again.
The chain of responsibility is passed right along, highlighting this deep-seated human tendency to avoid accountability, preferring to point fingers rather than just admit culpability.
And this pattern resonates even today, doesn't it? In personal conflicts, political disputes, even international relations, it's still happening.
Absolutely. Okay, so the blame game runs its course, but it doesn't absolve anyone. Now we move to the pronouncement of consequences, the curses. And these are not only far-reaching, but fundamentally reshape the created order.
This is where the fallout really lands.
God begins with the serpent. In Genesis 3:14, he says, "Because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all cattle, and above every beast of the field. Upon thy belly shalt thou go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life."
Wow. That's quite a curse.
It's not just a physical change, like suddenly losing legs. It's a profound transformation of its very nature and status. It symbolizes its degradation, its permanent mark as an agent of evil, crawling in the dust.
Indeed, it's a permanent mark of its adversary role, an eternal reminder of its treachery. But listen closely now, because amidst this condemnation, this judgment, a profound and utterly crucial prophecy is given. It's in Genesis 3:15. This detail, theologians often call it the proto-evangelium. It means the first gospel, the very first hint or promise of redemption.
Right in the middle of the curses.
Right there, God declares to the serpent, "And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel."
Enmity, conflict, between the serpent's offspring and the woman's offspring.
Yes, but notice the outcome. The woman's seed, her offspring, shall bruise thy head, a fatal blow, crushing, while the serpent shall bruise his heel, a wound, yes, painful, but not fatal.
So a promise of ultimate victory, but with suffering involved.
Exactly. It's an astonishing glimmer of hope right in the face of judgment. It hints at a future deliverer who will come from humanity, specifically from the woman's lineage, to confront and ultimately overcome the serpent's power, though suffering a wound in the process.
That is such a powerful glimmer of hope, a surprising act of grace right there, setting a new course for the story.
It really is. It hangs in the air as God continues.
Then God turns to the woman. In Genesis 3:16, he declares, "I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children."
Pain in childbirth, that's a direct consequence.
It introduces pain and arduous labor into what was presumably a joyful, natural process before. And then, a truly significant shift in relational dynamics is foretold. "Thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee."
That line causes a lot of discussion.
Immense discussion. This isn't necessarily a description of God's ideal for relationships, is it? It sounds more like a prophetic statement of brokenness.
Many interpret it that way, yes. As a consequence of sin entering the world, foreshadowing future relational friction, power imbalances, struggles between men and women that would plague human relationships, a distortion of the original partnership.
Right, a description of the fallen reality, not the created ideal.
That's a common understanding.
Okay? And for Adam, his judgment is directly linked to his specific action and inaction. "Because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, Thou shalt not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for thy sake, in sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life." That's verse 17.
You notice that. The ground is cursed for your sake, because of what you did.
The very ground itself, once so fertile, so benevolent, is now cursed because of humanity's sin. This isn't just a change in agricultural conditions, is it? It feels bigger.
It feels cosmic, doesn't it?
Yeah.
A consequence reflecting the broken relationship between humanity and the very earth it was meant to steward and care for.
So what does this cursed ground ultimately mean for Adam, and by extension for all of us?
It means a life of profound toil and struggle. The easy abundance of Eden is gone. The land will now yield thorns also and thistles, verse 18 tells us.
Things that hinder growth, that cause pain.
Exactly, necessitating hard, often frustrating labor just for basic sustenance. And then a powerful, stark decree of mortality is given in Genesis 3:1. "In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou return unto the ground, for out of it wast thou taken. For dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return."
Dust to dust. The finality of death enters the picture.
It introduces the absolute certainty of physical death, the cessation of life, and the constant arduous struggle of daily existence. That lie the serpent told, "Ye shall not surely die," well, it was a deception about immediate annihilation, perhaps, but it utterly failed to prevent the introduction of death into their lives, both spiritual separation and ultimately physical death.
Death becomes the inevitable end of this fallen existence.
Yes, it's the ultimate consequence stated here.
So even amidst all this judgment, all this sorrow, There's that fascinating, almost defiant moment of hope in Genesis 3:20. Adam names his wife Eve,
Chava in Hebrew.
which means mother of all living, the text explains, because she was the mother of all living. It feels like an act of faith, doesn't it? An acknowledgement of the continuation of life, of a future, despite the curses that now define their existence.
It really does. It's as if even in the face of death, life finds a way to assert itself. It might even connect back to that promise in 3.15, the seed of the woman. He's naming her role in future life.
That's a powerful connection. Then, in a truly compassionate and deeply symbolic act, right in the middle of judgment, unto Adam also and to his wife did the Lord God make coats of skins and clothe them. Verse 21.
This is remarkable. God himself provides clothing.
This act of covering them with animal skins contrasts so sharply, so profoundly with our own insufficient self-made fig leaves, doesn't it?
It does. The fig leaves were their inadequate attempt to cover their shame. God's provision is substantial, real.
It suggests a deeper, more substantial covering, a provision that only God could make. And some see in this the first hint of sacrifice, though the text doesn't explicitly state an animal died for them here. But skins require death.
It certainly implies a cost, a life given to cover their nakedness, their sin. It's divine grace in action, even as judgment is being executed.
This act of God providing clothing, even after their monumental disobedience, it speaks volumes about his character, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's not just pure wrath. There's enduring care mixed in.
Mercy mingled with judgment. It's a recurring theme.
But then comes the final, inevitable consequence within the garden itself.
God states the profound rationale for removing them. Verse 22. Behold, the man is become as one of us, to know good and evil. And now, lest he put forth his hand, and take also of the tree of life, and eat, and live forever.
That's a chilling thought.
It highlights the terrifying danger of their new fallen knowledge, this experiential knowledge of evil combined with the potential for eternal corrupted existence, an immortal fallen humanity.
That'd be a truly horrifying prospect, wouldn't it?
It would be an eternalization of the problem, trapping humanity in a state of moral corruption, separation, and suffering without end. It would be hell on earth, forever.
So, to prevent this, Adam is sent him forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from whence he was taken. Verse 23.
The exile begins.
This expulsion isn't just physical relocation. It symbolizes a complete break from their original state of innocence, intimacy with God, and access to the source of sustained life. And to ensure absolutely no return to the tree of life, God placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubims and a flaming sword which turned every way to keep the way of the tree of life.
Verse 24.
Cherubim, powerful angelic beings, and a flaming sword. The entrance is sealed, impassable.
Eden is now irretrievably inaccessible, a lost paradise, its gates sealed forever by divine decree. Wow, what an incredibly rich and deeply tragic narrative. Now that we've walked through the story, let's take a moment to really dig into the characters involved, explore their motivations, their responsibilities, which are far more complex than just a simple good versus evil caricature.
Definitely, there are layers here, starting with the serpent. As we heard, it's described as more subtle than any beast of the field. This isn't just a throwaway detail, is it? It's a character portrait.
It's absolutely crucial. The Hebrew word aram, translated as subtle or crafty or cunning, it carries these connotations of shrewdness, cleverness, but in a deceptive way here.
Okay.
It highlights its nature as a sophisticated deceiver, a figure that operates through, insidious temptation, psychological manipulation, rather than just overt physical force or obvious malice.
It works on the mind.
Precisely. Within the narrative, it functions as an embodiment of anti-divine wisdom, a corrosive influence actively working to undermine God's benevolent design. And its tactics, as we saw, are quite deliberate and psychologically astute.
Yeah, we track those. First, subtly twisting God's command, planting that seed of doubt. Then moving to direct contradiction, outright denying God's warning of death.
The flat-out lie.
And then, the ultimate move. The implied accusation against God's benevolence, suggesting God is holding back good things from them, appealing directly to that desire for power, for forbidden knowledge. For God doth know, ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil.
It's a masterful manipulation, isn't it? Designed to make them distrust their loving creator and aspire to this false sense of autonomy.
But what about its own motives? The text doesn't explicitly state them. Why did the serpent do this? What was its goal?
That's a profound question. The text leaves somewhat open to interpretation. The text itself doesn't give us the serpent's internal dialogue or state its motivations explicitly, nor does it directly identify the serpent with Satan here in Genesis 3, though later biblical tradition certainly makes that connection.
Okay, so based purely on its actions here.
Based on its actions, it strongly suggests a desire to disrupt God's perfect creation, to undermine God's authority, to lead humanity into rebellion, into separation from God.
Why? Jealousy, malice.
Well, if we infer from the broader biblical context where the serpent is seen as an adversary, Satan, one could posit envy of humanity's favored position, or perhaps a desire for humanity to share its own fallen, alienated state, a misery loves company kind of motive.
Yeah.
Regardless of the precise why, its goal is clearly destructive, to fracture the harmonious relationship between God and humanity. And the enduring consequence, of course, is the curse we discussed, establishing that permanent enmity and foreshadowing its ultimate defeat. That future defeat is critical.
Moving on to Eve. She's the first to actually engage with the tempter. And her interaction, as we noted, involves that interesting embellishment, adding "don't touch it" to God's command. What else do we learn about her interaction and, more importantly, her decision-making process?
Eve's interaction reveals both her vulnerability and her capacity for deliberation. She engages in dialogue, right? She doesn't just shut the serpent down. This shows a mind capable of reasoning, but also, as we noted, she misrepresents or perhaps exaggerates God's command.
The "neither shall ye touch it" part.
Yes. This small addition, as we discussed, might reflect a misunderstanding or maybe a psychological attempt to bolster her resolve by making the boundary seem even stricter in her own mind. Stay far away.
Right.
This subtle vulnerability, whatever its source, is expertly exploited by the serpent. It kind of pounces on that before denying the ultimate consequence of dying.
And her decision-making process, it wasn't impulsive, was it? It's described as this careful rationalization based on multiple appeals.
Exactly. She sees the fruit is good for food, physical pleasure, pleasant to the eyes, aesthetic appeal, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, intellectual, or spiritual gain. She's weighing these perceived benefits, all these promises of fulfillment, against God's single command.
It feels very familiar, doesn't it? Like how we often rationalize our own temptations, find the good reasons to do the wrong thing.
It's incredibly relatable. This detailed internal process shows her agency, her free will in action. She actively makes a choice based on her desires and what she perceives as beneficial, despite the clear prohibition.
So she wasn't just a passive victim of deception.
Her active role is undeniable. She is the first one to take and eat the fruit. Her subsequent act of giving it to Adam makes him complicit, yes, but her action is primary in initiating the transgression itself.
Okay. And her defense later. The serpent beguiled me, and I did eat.
That holds some truth. She was deceived. The serpent lied to her about the consequences and God's motives. However, the preceding verses reveal that she still made a conscious choice to act on those desires, prioritizing the perceived benefits over obedience. The deception clouded her judgment, perhaps, diminished her understanding of the risk, but it didn't eliminate her will or her choice to act.
Then there's Adam. His role is often debated, sometimes seen as passive, just going along, sometimes equally culpable. But the text seems pretty clear on his immediate presence during the event, doesn't it? And his lack of intervention.
It is remarkably clear, I think. The text explicitly states that Eve gave also unto her husband with her. That phrase "with her" is just crucial. It implies Adam was right there, in immediate proximity, not off gardening somewhere else during the entire temptation scene. He likely witnessed the dialogue between Eve and the serpent, saw Eve's deliberation, and observed her act of disobedience.
And did nothing. Said nothing.
His failure to intervene, to object, or to even speak up and reassert God's command during the serpent's deception, that silence is a key, often overlooked element of his responsibility.
And he's not explicitly deceived in the same way Eve is, narratively speaking. He takes the fruit and did eat. That's it. No internal debate described for him.
That's correct. His choice is presented as an independent act, maybe influenced by his wife, maybe a desire to stay with her, share her fate, we can speculate, but it carries a different flavor than Eve's. He appears to act with full knowledge of the command and its consequence, without the direct deception about dying that Eve experienced. He just eats.
When confronted by God, his response is that immediate twofold blame we talked about. The woman whom thou gavest to be with me, she gave me of the tree, and I did eat.
Yeah, that blame shifting is stark.
He blames Eve, yes, but he also subtly, yet powerfully, blames God for giving him Eve in the first place. This profound avoidance of personal responsibility is such a significant aspect of his character in this chapter. It's an archetypal human response to guilt, isn't it?
It really is. Point the finger anywhere else.
So his responsibility is immense, especially considering, as you mentioned, he was the one who initially received the command directly from God back in Genesis 2. Before Eve was even created, he was the one explicitly told, "Of every tree thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it. For in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die." Clear as day.
Precisely. As the first recipient of the divine command, perhaps seen in some sense as the covenant head at that point, his direct disobedience carries immense weight. He knew the rule firsthand. His choice, in light of that prior clear instruction, seals the consequences for humanity alongside Eve's choice.
This deep dive into each character's actions and motives, it really helps us understand the complex interplay, doesn't it? Temptation, choice, responsibility.
Yeah.
Showing that the fall wasn't just a simple mistake, but a cascade of deliberate decisions.
Yes, involving multiple actors, each playing a distinct but crucial role.
So what does this all mean for us then? Stepping back from the narrative, the theological and thematic implications of Genesis 3 are just. They're profound. They resonate throughout the entire biblical narrative and, frankly, with the universal human experience.
They really set the stage for everything else.
Let's start with the very nature of sin itself, as it's portrayed here. What is sin at its most fundamental level according to this chapter? What are we looking at?
Well, at its core, sin in Genesis 3 is presented, first and foremost, as a deliberate act of disobedience. It's crossing a line God clearly set. It's a rejection of his benevolent instruction.
It's not just an accident or a misunderstanding then.
No, it's portrayed as a conscious, intentional violation of a boundary set by the Creator, the same Creator who had freely provided everything else for their enjoyment and well-being. This act of disobedience is fundamentally an assertion of self-will against divine will. I know better, or I want this more.
And it seems inextricably intertwined with a fundamental distrust of God's goodness, doesn't it?
Absolutely, that's key.
The serpent's insidious suggestion that God was holding something back, something genuinely good, ye shall be as gods, that effectively eroded their trust. Humanity was led to doubt God's benevolent intentions, to see him maybe as a rival or a jealous oppressor, rather than the generous, loving provider he had shown himself to be. This erosion of trust feels almost as destructive as the disobedience itself.
That's a crucial point, because once trust is broken, the relationship itself is fractured at its core. Furthermore, the allure of knowing good and evil signifies something deeper, more existential. It's a desire for self-definition.
What do you mean by that?
It's a desire to define morality and truth for oneself, to transcend creaturely limits and essentially usurp a divine prerogative. Humanity sought to become the arbiter of right and wrong, rather than relying on God's established good order.
So wanting to be in charge of the rules.
Exactly. It's a grasping for autonomy over reverence. The creature attempting to become the creator, or at least equal to him, in moral understanding and authority. This is arguably the root of so much human striving and ultimately suffering, trying to be God.
And it vividly highlights the deceptive appeal of sin, doesn't it? The fruit, as Eve perceived it, looked good. It was good for food, pleasant to the eyes, and desired to make one wise.
The trifecta of temptation.
Sin almost always presents itself as appealing, beneficial, desirable. It promises fulfillment or enlightenment or freedom, but it utterly masks its true, destructive, isolating, and often enslaving consequences. It's a classic bait and switch.
Exactly, which leads directly to the next major theme, the loss of innocence and the genesis of shame.
Right. The promised eyes shall be opened happens, but not as expected.
Not at all. Instead of glorious enlightenment, it brings this stark, painful awareness of their nakedness, their vulnerability. They knew that they were naked. This isn't higher knowledge. It's a painful self-awareness of their fallen state, their exposure, their inadequacy. It's knowledge born of transgression, not wisdom.
This new knowledge immediately leads to shame and guilt, prompting them to fashion those rudimentary coverings from fig leaves. It's not just about physical covering, is it?
No, it's the birth of self-awareness laced with regret, an internal conflict, that desperate urge to conceal, to hide our flaws, our failures. This resonates so deeply with our own experiences of embarrassment, insecurity, the desire to hide parts of ourselves.
It absolutely does. And their attempt to hide from God's presence, physically hiding among the trees, it vividly portrays that fractured relationship, the replacement of harmonious, uninhibited fellowship with paralyzing fear, that open, intimate communion where God walked with them. It's utterly shattered, replaced by distance and dread. This isn't just physical hiding, it's a spiritual and emotional withdrawal that marks the beginning of humanity's alienation from God.
A fundamental break.
This entire narrative also powerfully underscores the concept of free will, doesn't it? And the immense weight of choice. Adam and Eve weren't coerced. They weren't puppets.
No, they weren't. The story emphasizes that they possessed genuine free will. They heard the command, they were presented with a choice to trust God or trust the serpent and their own desires, and they made a conscious decision to transgress the divine command.
It really highlights the immense responsibility and gravity of human choices.
It does. Their singular decision, born of their own will, fundamentally reshaped the course of all subsequent human experience. It demonstrates that our choices, even seemingly small ones, can have profound, lasting, and sometimes cosmic repercussions. We are not puppets, we are agents, capable of great good or great harm through our choices.
And those repercussions manifest as these curses and consequences, reshaping existence itself in such a dramatic fashion. God's original warning back in Genesis 2, "Thou shalt surely die," well, it manifests immediately as spiritual death, right?
Yes, that profound separation from God, that loss of innocence and fellowship, that happened instantly.
And eventually it leads to physical mortality. "Unto dust shalt thou return." The serpent's lie wasn't really about immediate annihilation, was it? It was a clever deception about the introduction of death into their lives, both spiritual and ultimately physical.
Exactly. Death, which was absent from the original creation, now becomes a fundamental part of the human condition because of their choice.
The impact on relationships is particularly profound and far-reaching. It illustrates how sin isn't just an individual issue. It corrupts everything it touches.
It really does. Look at the God-human relationship. Intimate fellowship, God walking in the garden, replaced by separation, hiding, fear, judgment, and eventual expulsion. The relationship is profoundly fractured.
And humanity's relationship with nature, that suffers a dramatic inversion too.
Completely. The joyful task of dressing and keeping the garden, that harmonious stewardship, it transforms into arduous toil. A struggle against accursed ground that now yields thorns also and thistles. Work turns from delight into burdensome endeavor, a perpetual fight against resistance and decay.
And the relationship between man and woman, once that ideal partnership, one flesh, not ashamed, that's deeply marred too.
Yes, it is. The fall introduces sorrow in childbearing for the woman. Pain enters that process, and that new hierarchical dynamic is described. Thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. As we said, likely a description of the broken reality, not the ideal.
Foreshadowing relational friction, power imbalances, tensions, a painful departure from the original harmony.
A consequence of sin distorting God's design.
Even within humanity itself, there's a profound internal shift. From that state of blissful, unburdened innocence, naked, and we're not ashamed, they fall into deep self-consciousness, guilt, shame, that immediate need for self-covering.
It introduces internal conflict, a sense of inadequacy, self-condemnation, a fractured relationship with one's own self. This internal struggle, this sense of being not enough or needing to hide parts of ourselves. It's a pervasive aspect of the human experience that traces directly back to this moment.
And finally, as we discussed, the introduction of mortality and pain, the implied immortality, access to the tree of life, replaced by a life of suffering, sorrow, sweat, and the absolute, inescapable certainty of physical death. Unto dust shalt thou return.
It's a radical alteration from the perfect world God created, a world now subject to decay, suffering, and finitude, an existence bounded by an end.
But amidst all these devastating consequences, this unraveling of creation, we find that truly remarkable glimmer of hope you mentioned earlier, the Proto-Evangelium.
Yes.
Genesis 3.15.
Yes. This verse just stands out like a beacon of light amidst the curses. It's a counter-narrative of future redemption, announced right at the point of failure.
Can you restate it? It's so important.
And I will put enmity between thee, the serpent, and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel.
It establishes this ongoing, permanent cosmic conflict, doesn't it? Between the seed of the woman, humanity, particularly a future descendant, and the seed of the serpent, the forces of evil.
Exactly. But crucially, it foretells a decisive, ultimate victory for the woman's offspring. He will bruise thy head, a fatal crushing blow to the serpent's power. Even though in the process, this deliverer will suffer a wound, the serpent will bruise his heel.
So victory, but through suffering. Pain is part of the redemptive act itself.
That seems to be the implication, yes.
So this is considered the earliest promise of salvation, laying the absolute groundwork for all future redemptive history.
That's exactly how it's traditionally understood. It signals that the fall, as devastating as it is not the final word. God has a plan right from the very beginning of the brokenness to overcome the consequences of sin.
It's a foreshadowing, a divine promise woven right into the fabric of the judgment itself. And it becomes the driving force of the entire biblical narrative that follows.
Precisely. It's the first hint that God, in his mercy, will not abandon his creation, but will actively work to reverse the effects of the fall. It's why the rest of the story unfolds. Hashtag cultural and historical context. Interpreting internal textual elements.
Okay, to deepen our understanding of this incredibly rich text, let's briefly touch on some of the cultural and maybe literary elements within Genesis 3. The symbolism of the serpent, for instance. We heard it's described as more subtle. How might a serpent have been perceived in ancient cultures? Was it always just evil?
That's a great question because the cultural context does enrich our reading. In many ancient Near Eastern cultures, serpents were actually quite complex symbols. They weren't universally seen as purely evil.
Oh.
They could represent wisdom, sometimes hidden knowledge, fertility, healing, think of the serpent on a staff, or even divine power. But they could also represent danger, chaos, death, and underworld forces. So, quite ambiguous.
Okay, so a complex symbol.
Very. The description of the serpent as more subtle, Aram, plays into that idea of cunning, craftiness, deceptive wisdom rather than just brute force. It's an intelligent adversary. So within this narrative, it clearly functions as an embodiment of anti-divine wisdom, a corrosive, seditious influence, actively working against God's benevolent design. And the curse, later, crawling on its belly, eating dust. That's a symbolic degradation. It strips it of any perceived prestige or power, reinforcing its status as a defeated adversary, permanently marked by its treachery and humiliation. It's not just biology, it's a cosmic demotion.
And what about the tree of knowledge of good and evil itself? This isn't just some random tree in the garden. It's absolutely central to the drama. What does its presence and the prohibition around it symbolize?
This tree is incredibly significant, symbolically. It serves as a clear, tangible boundary marker set by God. It seems to symbolize God's sole authority, his prerogative, to define good and evil for humanity.
So eating from it was like saying, we'll decide what's right and wrong for ourselves.
Exactly. It represents a usurpation of this divine right, a desire to be autonomous moral agents, to set one's own standards rather than receiving them from God. It's a fundamental challenge to the established good order, the creature attempting to seize a role meant only for the creator. And the knowledge it offers isn't merely intellectual.
Right, you mentioned this. The knowledge gained wasn't benevolent wisdom or a higher state of understanding like the serpent promised. It sounds like something far more painful.
Not at all in the way they anticipated. The knowledge gained wasn't abstract philosophical understanding. It was a lived experiential awareness of good lost and evil, introduced through their own act of defiance.
Knowing evil by doing it.
Precisely. It was knowledge acquired through the bitter taste of disobedience and its devastating consequences, shame, fear, guilt, rather than true enlightenment or divine wisdom. It was knowing what it meant to be separated from God, to be fallen, to experience the stark contrast between their original innocence and their new corrupted state.
And it's important to remember the other special tree, the tree of life in all this. Its purpose and fate are deeply symbolic too, aren't they?
Absolutely. The very existence of the tree of life, mentioned back in Genesis 2 and again here in chapter 3 when they're expelled, it implies that eternal life, or at least sustained life in perfect harmony, was freely available in the garden before the fall.
So immortality wasn't inherent, but available through the tree.
That's how it seems. Access to the tree sustained life. So the expulsion and the subsequent guarding of this tree by the cherubim and the flaming sword, it highlights that the consequences of disobedience extend to losing access to that sustained life in their original, perfect, unfallen state.
It's a stark reminder of what was lost.
And a necessary measure, as God stated, to prevent a fallen humanity from living forever in that brokenness. It signifies the true gravity of their transgression, losing access to the source of unending life in God's presence.
So if we pull back now and really connect the threads, drawing that clear line from Genesis 1 and 2, the story of perfect creation, to Genesis 3, the story of the fall, the alteration is just. It's radical. It's a cosmic shift.
It really is a fundamental change in the state of affairs.
Chapters 1 and 2 describe a world that God repeatedly declared good, and at the very end of creation, very good. A state of inherent perfection, harmony, unblemished goodness, everything working as intended.
And Genesis 3 shatters that harmony completely, irrevocably within that original framework. It introduces a cursed ground, suffering, decay, entropy into the very fabric of creation. The ideal state is broken, giving way to a world where conflict, pain, and death are now inherent reality.
From universal harmony to universal conflict and discord.
And stillness.
Let's trace that radical alteration through the different relationships, because it affects everything. First, God and humanity. Chapters 1 and 2 imply open, intimate fellowship, God walking with them, no fear.
That open, trusting fellowship is utterly replaced by separation. We see humanity hiding, consumed by fear, and then the eventual definitive expulsion from the garden. The relationship is profoundly fractured, characterized now by fear, judgment, distance, and the need for covering and atonement.
Then there's humanity's relationship with nature. Adam's initial task was that joyful work of dressing and keeping the garden, a partnership with creation, a harmonious stewardship. A delight, really.
But after the fall, that delightful task transforms into arduous toil, a relentless struggle against a cursed ground that now stubbornly yields thorns also and thistles. Sustenance becomes a laborious fight against a resistant, sometimes hostile environment. Nature itself now seems to reflect the brokenness, mirroring humanity's inner turmoil and its outward struggles.
And the relationship between man and woman.
Yeah.
Once that ideal partnership, one flesh, not ashamed, perfect unity, that's deeply marred too.
Yes, it is. The fall introduces sorrow and pain in childbearing for the woman. And that new challenging dynamic is described where the man shall rule over thee again, likely foreshadowing pervasive relational friction, power imbalances, inherent tensions born out of insecurity and fractured trust. A painful departure from the original harmony of mutual partnership.
And even within humanity itself, that profound internal shift. From blissful, unburdened innocence naked, and we're not ashamed, they fall into deep self-consciousness, guilt, shame, that immediate, desperate need for self-covering.
It introduces internal conflict, a sense of inadequacy, self-condemnation, a fractured relationship with one's own self. This internal struggle, this perpetual sense of being not enough or needing to hide parts of ourselves, it's such a pervasive aspect of the human experience, and it traces directly back to this monumental moment.
And finally, most devastatingly perhaps, the introduction of mortality and pain. The implied immortality, the access to the tree of life, replaced by a life of inherent suffering, sorrow, sweat, and the absolute inescapable certainty of physical death. Unto dust shalt thou return.
It's the radical, comprehensive alteration from the perfect world God created. A world now subject to decay, suffering, and finitude. An existence bounded by an end. Brokenness is now the norm.
So this single momentous chapter really sets the stage for all subsequent biblical narratives, doesn't it? Without Genesis 3, the rest of the story, with all its complexities, conflicts, covenants, and striving, it simply wouldn't make sense. It's the essential backstory.
Exactly. It establishes a profound need for a deliverer, a need powerfully foreshadowed in the Proto-Evangelium, that first promise of redemption. This promise, this glimmer of hope against the backdrop of despair, it fuels the entire biblical narrative, which then becomes this sprawling, epic story of God's redemptive plan to reverse the devastating effects of the fall. Genesis 3 presents the central problem to which the rest of the Bible offers the solution.
It also provides the foundational explanation for the existence of sin, evil, pain, suffering, death in the world as we experience it. It frames humanity's universal struggle and the pervasive brokenness of creation we see all around us.
Yes. And importantly, even in the midst of severe judgment, God's enduring mercy and covenantal faithfulness are still evident.
How so?
Well, He provides clothing for Adam and Eve, that compassionate act covering their shame, and He offers that crucial promise of victory over evil. This demonstrates that His care endures, His purpose isn't thwarted. It sets the stage for future covenants with Noah, Abraham, and indeed all of humanity throughout history.
So Genesis 3, in essence, explains why the rest of the Bible, with its stories of brokenness and redemption, trials and triumphs, is absolutely necessary.
Precisely. It's the origin story of our broken world and the very first whisper of how it might eventually be healed. #tag conclusion.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's abundantly clear is that Genesis chapter 3 is a narrative with just unparalleled foundational significance.
Absolutely fundamental.
It meticulously clarifies the origin of the human condition, explaining why we experience shame, internal conflict, relational friction, the arduousness of toil, physical pain, and ultimately death.
It lays it all out, the root causes.
It teaches us profound truths about the nature of temptation, the immense far-reaching weight of our choices, and the devastating ripple effects of disobedience that cascade through generations.
Yet, and this is so critically important to remember, it also contains that very first whisper of hope, that promise of a future deliverance from the serpent's power.
Right. The Proto-Evangelium.
It lays the comprehensive foundation, not just for the pervasive problem of sin and suffering, but for the grand, overarching solution that will unfold throughout the rest of biblical history. It presents both the depth of the problem and the first hint of the divine solution.
The story ultimately reminds us that our choices, both individual and collective, carry immense, often unseen weight. They shape not only our own lives, but the entire world around us.
Our actions have consequences.
So for you, our listener, maybe just consider this. Think about a choice in your own life. Could be large and momentous, or maybe something that felt deceptively small at the time. A choice you now look back on as a profound turning point. What did you truly desire in that specific moment? What was the alluring fruit that attracted you? And what unexpected consequences, both challenging and perhaps surprisingly beneficial, emerged from that decision?
That's a powerful reflection.
What profound insights does this ancient story, laid bare today, reveal about the recurring patterns of temptation, the dynamics of blame, and the far-reaching consequences we continue to face, personally and collectively, even today?
It's a timeless mirror, isn't it? One that reflects these universal truths about the human heart, the choices we make, and maybe, just maybe, the enduring grace that meets us even in our brokenness.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Genesis chapter 3. We'll continue our journey to these foundational texts next time.